This time on PedalBox, we're at the front of the car again, fixing a problem that one of our commenters raised on a previous video and patching up one final thing for the IVA before we take this broken splitter off for good. A couple episodes ago, we mounted up a towing eye on our little aluminium crash bar here, and we were basically thinking of the happy path. On flat tarmac, good conditions, a careful tow driver, it'd probably be okay. But one of our viewers, Jason, pointed out in the comments on that episode, if we're in a gravel trap, or if our tow truck driver is particularly aggressive, anything like that, very different scenario. The little rivnuts that we've got holding that towing eye in probably won't take that kind of abuse. So we should probably reinforce, change how we mount it, go all the way through the crash bar, mount fully through it, and that'll give us a lot more strength and make sure they don't get pulled out in those sorts of much worse conditions. So for anyone who's not seen that episode, this here is our towing eye adapter. Now we've got a threaded nut welded onto the back of the bracket here, which our towing eye would actually screw into through the grille. And we've got two holes on the top that we bolt through up into those rivnuts I mentioned in the aluminium crash structure. And speaking of the towing eye going through the grille, there is something we have to address with that as well. So you've got the grille back in place now. We needed it there to figure out where we had to punch the hole for the towing eye to go through, and with it in place is another thing that we can fix while we're at it. So already it's secured in at both bottom corners, and there's a little flange on the bottom in the middle that would attach into our splitter. It's not right now because the splitter's buggered, but we'll get that back on later. But there's nothing holding it in at the top, which means the grille, he says, is actually quite well wedged at the minute, but the grille is able to move around a lot more freely than we'd like. So we probably have to sort that out to keep the IVA man happy. And that means while we've got the crash bar off, redesigning the towing eye mount, we can put a flange on that to attach the top of the grille to. 7 different pieces coming together, as always. So here's the crash bar. Thankfully, it came out of the car quite easy, which is a bit of a surprise to me. And on the underside, obviously I've just flipped it upside down, you can see those 2 rivnuts we mentioned. Now Jason did point out that these would probably not hold against the sort of pull-out force that we get if we're being lugged out of a gravel trap or something. But it's actually worse than that. There's a second problem that neither Aid nor I noticed until we got it out just now and had a look at this on the bench. And really we should have clocked this because we've used rivnuts in enough other places on the car. It's just for some reason we didn't really kind of think of it. And that's that with the rivnuts, your bracket isn't actually attached or isn't actually securely mounted to the face of the material that the rivnuts are in. So you can imagine if we were bolted down here, any like tension force that we put on our towing eye is kind of a one-to-one lever, right? We put a force on here and it wants to come up here because it's pivoting kind of around the the whole foot of the plate. So you've got kind of a one-to-one lever. Every ton there is probably about a ton or so on the bolts, but in this case it's actually a lot worse. So with the rivnuts, because they sit proud of the material, our bracket doesn't sit flush on the crash bar. Our bracket is actually sitting entirely on the shoulders of the rivnuts, and that means it's a much stronger lever to try and pull those bolts out of it. And if I just as an example, if I try holding this thing down with my thumb, I need just the tiniest bit of force up at this end on the towing eye to produce a really powerful kind of pull out of those rivnuts. So there's a bit of a twofer here, so thank you very much, Jason, for pointing this out. So one, by getting rid of the rivnuts and bolting all the way through, we're going to get the strength back that we thought we had anyway, because obviously we weren't aware of this like horrible lever action that we'd managed to put in there. And 2, obviously by bolting all the way through, it's just stronger to begin with. So we won't have lost the strength that we hadn't realised we'd lost, and we gain a bunch more strength on top, which is awesome. So there is a little bit of a challenge with that. It's not massive, it's just a little bit. And that's that these 2 faces, this top face here, or sorry, this bottom face as it were, and the top face there, they're not actually on the same plane as each other. There is an angle between them. So when we're drilling through, we actually have to drill through normal, like 90 degrees to this face, not to this one. If we drill through kind of 90 degrees from that one, we'll spit out somewhere like the corner, which is obviously difficult to put any sort of reinforcement on. So we're going to sit this down on the drill press, drill through 90 degrees, which is going to be on the squiff to the bottom face, but it will at least make everything else easy. It'll mean that our reinforcement plate on there is just a plate with some nuts on it. Everything will be nice and easy. It just means that on the top here, where our bracket goes on, we'll need a little bit of a wedge just to get that angled, just to get that angled surface up to the same angle as the top face, which is not the end of the world. So the rivnuts are out, we've punched the holes out to 12mm, put our bolts through and everything, and we've mounted the bracket up kind of in place. Now this is where you really get to see the effect of that kind of misalignment between the two faces. Because these nuts are attached to bolts which are perpendicular to the bottom face, when we clamp this all up, all the angles are a bit iffy. We've got a gap underneath the bracket here, the bracket's not neat against the bolts, so we've got to wedge this thing up to get all of the faces flat with each other, which will also solve that leverage problem we mentioned earlier by moving the centre of the sort of pivot point all the way out to this corner. So towing eye bracket's all back together now. We've got a kind of wedge here in the form of a little piece of rod that we've welded on the underside face. It's not a full plate. A plate would be tricky because the bracket's actually slightly curved. So getting it all up to the right alignment, pushing a piece of rod in and tacking it and securing that all in place worked out a much easier way of getting the same effect. So that's all done. It means we can move on to mounting our grille properly. Now we drew some lines on this while it was on the car. You won't see them on the camera, but we've got some barely visible lines on here that mark where the grille meets the crash bar. So we're going to set this in the vise so that the top of the jaw is, I'm going to get my glove stuck in the vise as well, and the top of the jaw is where the front edge of the grille will sit in the car. And all we're going to do now is get this in place. I'm going to attach some little brackets that we've made up. So we've got two little pieces of angle here that we've punched a hole in and bent around a bit to make that same slight past 90-degree angle on here. We're going to weld them onto the frame here, being very, very careful because obviously we've still got the plastic mesh in there. And we're going to punch some holes in the back of the crash bar. We might save the hole punching and riv nuts on here for when it's back on the car, so everything's like properly together. The bottom corners here are all in the right place, but we can do our rough assembly in the garage here where it's at least a little bit warmer, a little bit less breezy and a bit more sheltered. It's been a couple of weeks as we've done other little bits of work on the car, but our grille surround is now mostly done. We've got our support tabs on the top here that are going to attach into the crash bar. We tacked them in place with the plastic mesh still in place, but it was really, really hard work keeping the plastic cool enough to not melt. So we did manage, it was under protest, but we managed to pop the mesh out of it so that we could weld everything up properly, you know, big fat welds to try and keep everything properly solid. The plastic really didn't enjoy coming out. We had to bend it in a bunch of ways it really didn't like, so we're hoping to never have to do that again. And if I'm totally honest, we're a little bit worried about whether we can get it back in, because all these tabs now, we've got tabs all the way down both the long edges and on the short edges, so it might not be very easy getting it back in. But we can at least get this test fitted back to the car, make sure our bolt holes line up properly, get the plastic in, hopefully, and see where we end up. The grille's now in, it's bolted up on both of these top two bolt holes. We haven't bothered bolting in the bottom because we don't really need to at the minute. We're just sort of fit testing things around the top. And we've noticed that we may have just ever so slightly screwed ourselves. So two things. One, by bolting it up, we've actually pulled it higher up in the mouth here than it used to be. And two, when we reinforced the actual towing eye receiver, that little bracket under the crash bar, we changed how it kind of sits once it's all bolted up in place. So we've effectively, accidentally, moved that receiver nut down some, because it no longer kind of pulls up when we bolt it all into place. That's sitting lower, and the grille's sitting higher. So the hole that we'd previously punched in the mesh isn't actually over the hole that our towing eye now threads into. So we've got to punch a few more bits of plastic out, well, I think we do. We'll do a test fit now and see if I'm right or wrong. I'd love to be wrong. So it turns out that was a nice easy save, just cutting out the bottom piece of plastic there. We didn't have to do both, so we've still got some strength across it. Now means we can throw away most of the bolt and keep just this little stub at the bottom end. So we've put a little collar over it here so that when we wind it in, it naturally stops at about the right depth. So we've got a couple of threads poking out the back, and then this end here will turn into an actual towing eye. We're going to weld a bunch of metal onto here, and this, when we wind it in, is a really, really nice, easy fit. It just clears the top piece of plastic there. It might actually be that the collar catches it on the way in. Yeah, it does just about, so it won't be super fun to thread in, but it'll be fine.
While Chris has been working on this bolt at the front of the car, I've been working on the actual towing eye we're going to add on to the end of it. Now, before we took it out, Chris put a little mark on where 12 o'clock is, so that when this is wound all the way into that receiver, we know where the vertical plane is, or at least as close as we can realistically get, where the vertical plane is on that bolt wound all the way in. And that's so that we can add a towing eye in that plane. Every time it winds in, it will be in the same position, and it will be nice and easy to get the hook or whatever through that hole. Now, the hook itself is made of some roughly 1/4 inch steel. I drilled the largest hole I possibly could in, which was 22mm on my step drill, and then just shaped the outside so there's about 1 centimetre or so, nearly 1/2 inch of material all the way around it. So if we do need to open it up a little bit more, we can with the die grinder, or we might just have to make a new one if we really need to go much, much bigger. But either way, we tested this on one of those 3-piece solid bars that go between vehicles, so you can obviously tow them around, and that's about a 15 to 18mm hook that goes through. So obviously at 22mm, that will be fine, it will go through and work perfectly. It should also take the ratchet clamp hooks that we have if we need to pull things on that way, so hopefully we'll be okay. And we can always, if nothing else, put a shackle in it and make it work. So the way we're going to attach this on is cut a nice big groove in where that 12 o'clock point is, and make some space for this to sit into the bolt. So we have a lot more surface area all the way around, rather than just butt welding it right onto the front of here, which I don't think it would be very strong. It has a lot more strength laterally.
So towing eye's all welded up. Aid spent a few minutes going at it with the grinder just to shave off some of the rough edges, and we're now ready to test fit it in the front and see how it fits. So I'm just going to try running this in as quick as I can. The nice thing is we haven't managed to mangle the threads too badly with weld spatter or anything. It's gone quite a long way in here. It looks like it might even go all the way down where we're expecting. Not quite. So we're probably about 1/4 or 3/4 of a turn short of where we expected. We were hoping for vertical, not horizontal. But it's good and snug in there. It's holding on well. There's the only slop here is moving the grille itself around. Not the grille, sorry, the crash bar. So yeah, that seems like a win. With our towing eye now made, with the receiver modified, and with the grille mounted, we're all done at the front of the car for now. We obviously do still have to replace our splitter, so we're going to be ordering the new carbon kit to replace that in the near future. Keep an eye on a future episode for that one coming up. But other than that, the front of the car is now pretty much done. Now, if you want to help fund the expensive parts of the project, like the splitter kit that we're about to have to order, jump on patreon.com/PedalBox show. You can support us there from about $1 a month or more. Patrons also get a discount at our store at shop.pedalbox.show, where you can deck yourselves out with all sorts of hats, hoodies, t-shirts, all the usual sort of bits and pieces. All of that money does get funneled mostly into this car at the minute. I don't think we're putting any of it anywhere else. So yeah, stuff like this is really, really helpful to us. Our patrons have funded so many parts of this car. And it would be wonderful, wonderful if we can really put our foot down on getting some of these final bits going, because we're going to be ordering some brake lines soon. That's a couple of quid. The splitter kit's a couple of hundred. This stuff does really add up fairly quick, so we really do appreciate all of your support. So thanks again to all of our long-standing patrons and supporters. We really do appreciate you sticking with us as we get through these final, really miserable parts of the build. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time.